As the need for data for AI training continues to increase, many companies are turning to synthetic data to build their projects. But will this create new problems for companies down the road? We're going to discuss the pros and cons of using synthetic data on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Alexius Ronca. He is the CTO of Data and Growth at Invisible Technologies. Welcome to the show, Alexius.
Oh, thanks, Keith.
Hey,
happy to be here.
Yeah, so I love the company name Invisible Technologies. It's just got this cool factor to it. So you must be thrilled working for them.
Oh no, it's great. It's the best word. No,
yeah. It really is a cool name. So before we begin, I want to establish what the general consensus is around the definition of synthetic data, because as we get into the topic area, I think that some of the things that I think might be synthetic data could actually be considered synthetic content or synthetic output, especially with generative AI. Anything that you get from a generative AI prompt could be considered synthetic content. But I want to hone in on what we mean by synthetic data, or what you guys generally define synthetic data as.
Well, I think the key here, because virtually any sort of content or output, like you just described, could be classified as data, right? I think in the context of the work that Invisible does with AI training is that we're thinking about data that is used in the interest of training and improving large language models, right? And so it's anything in the sense that if there is human generated data and then AI or computer generated data, synthetic data sits in that second bucket of data that's created by computers in some capacity.
Right. Okay. And so when we start talking about it, why are companies looking to use synthetic data? What are the benefits that a company might get from using this versus, and again, is it okay to call it synthetic data versus real data, or is it preferred just to say human data?
I would call it human created data.
Human generated, human created.
Everything it's still real data. I think it's the idea is, I think as as the model trainers are kind of reaching the limit of publicly available data sources and the speed at which you can create human data, we're trying to figure out how do we create larger data sets in a faster time period that allows us to do different things with our model training activities, right? And so there's only, human data takes a long time to build. There's a lot of opportunities for error in the mix. Synthetic data, you can create thousands, millions of data points in minutes, right? I think that's one of the major advantages there.
Okay, and yeah, when I start thinking of synthetic data and I start hearing this, for some reason I start thinking of like Excel spreadsheets and database lists and lists of like maybe customer data, for example, because we talk with a lot of companies that are using synthetic data to create. I want to say again, I'm going to use the word fake, but to create data for training, but not based on real customers.
Well, and you're thinking of like dummy customers, right? And in order to do and that has been traditionally that's like the very naive use case for synthetic data, right? Is like, I want to be able to build a test environment, or I want to be able to build a new application without violating GDPR, but I need 1 million customers. How do I do that? Well, right. The simple use case is, let's use AI, or let's just use any algorithm to create some fake customers, right? The idea here with synthetic data and where people are getting to where it's becoming much more sophisticated is, how do we take the human data or the data that we know exists today and modify it and change it that can help train and fine tune models into a direction where we want them to go, that we don't have human data or historical data sets that can help us do that.
Okay. And why were companies turning to synthetic data? Is it, the couple of the stories that I've read have all been about, that there's not enough human generated data to properly train some of these AIs, or the AIs can't get better without more data. And again, I covered the world of autonomous vehicles a lot, and they would talk about using either simulated data or almost like simulated data to help train these automobiles, because there wasn't enough real-time data out there from the sensors and the LiDAR, for example.
Well, It really comes down to the fact that there's just not enough data out there. That's the main reason why we're going to synthetic data. And if you think about like when they were building like AlphaGo, right? A lot of that was built through synthetic data because there weren't enough games played in order to be able to train a model. So they actually had to build two models that would go against one another in an adversarial system that created synthetic data sets in that capacity. So actually, the reality is that the interesting about synthetic data, when you think of adversarial systems or systems that can be, guided in a direction which is either good or bad, you can actually get novel data sets that help fine tune and improve your model over time.
Okay, so obviously the benefit is that you get the data that you need to help train the models. Does that sound right?
Yeah, and you get it a lot faster, and you can iterate on it much more quickly. So if you create a human data set, that could take days, weeks, or even months to get enough, like a large enough corpus of data, and then it goes into the model, and everybody crosses their fingers and hopes the model improves.
Right, and in general too, when you create a synthetic data set, it's probably cleaner than a data set might be from a human generator.
Oh yeah,
we keep hearing about having bad data or unclear data or unstructured data. Like you can actually structure a synthetic one right from the start, right?
Yeah, I mean, the one of the biggest challenges of creating human data, especially new human data sets, is just orchestrating the ability to have many humans being able to affect the same task and create the same output.
Yeah,
it's ripe with errors. They have to create the right thing. They have to QA the right thing. Everybody kind of has to be in concert. When you build synthetic data, it's just going to follow a process. It's going to algorithmically get there, and the output's going to be same 99.9% of the time. Like the results are going to be what you expect them to be.
Yeah. So on the other end of the scale, though, again, these things aren't perfect. So what are the concerns that companies come to you with in their questions about synthetic data, or what have we seen out there that could get you down a path where it could be troublesome?
Biggest?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think like from like a model training perspective, always the biggest challenge with synthetic data is it giving us anything new or interesting that'll help improve our model, right?
Okay.
And if it's building off of data that we already know exists, it's already in the model to some capacity, and so the worry is that you're going to overfit your model to whatever the synthetic data is outputting. And that's why, like that example I gave beforehand about like the adversarial systems can help build novel data sets, but actually what you're seeing a lot of companies ask is like, what's the right mix of between human data and synthetic data, and how much human data do I need to create novel situations that help guide models in different directions, but at the same time building enough corpus of data that actually helps give me enough information to train my model. And so the way that I always think about it, the way that I talk about it is like especially if you're building a new model or a state-of-the-art model, you really want to get it up to bar. So you want to be able to take all the synthetic data. So the beauty about synthetic data is it gets you up to bar really quickly. So you think about like the distillation techniques that DeepSeek used and stuff like that. They were able to take the data out of other models and say, these are great answers, these are great answers, these are great answers, and we can get to bar. Now, how do you get above bar? That's where you have to go back to the human data and create data sets that get you out of that, I would say, a synthetic data moat.
Okay, and so when I start thinking about synthetic data and human data, I start thinking of it with a baking analogy with like oil and water. Is it something that can be mixed? Can you take human data, mix it with synthetic data to create something new, or do they always separate?
Oh, no.
Or is that just the worst analogy we've ever heard?
So, I mean, if you took one piece of synthetic data and you took one piece of human created data, like the untrained eye would never know the difference. And actually, there's a good chance nobody knows. I mean, there's lots of tools on the internet today that, you can take an output from a model, which is a piece of synthetic data, and say, did AI create that?
Yeah.
And if a human created it, they're kind of accurate, but at the same time, they still detect things that an AI created as human created it, and they also detect it in the other direction. So nobody could tell the difference. I would just say it's all water.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not oil and water or oil and water. Is it more like just adding Kool-Aid to water and then it just mixes and you get a different?
Well, I would
or is it just adding water to water?
I would say it's more like take two milks, like dairy milk and oat milk.
Yep.
And you want to see how it changes the recipe. So if you're making pancakes, right, and you use cow milk, it's going to have one flavor. You're going to use oat milk, it's going to have another flavor. They're both going to act as like, a liquid and a binding agent for the recipe, but they're both milk.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
See, I love that we're getting into analogies in baking. So very good, Alexius. All right. So, one of the things that I'm seeing too is that companies are using AI models, but they're using their own internal data to obtain more accurate results. And that's the whole RAG model. Correct?
Yeah.
Like, is there still a use case for them to use synthetic data in some of these cases, or are they going from like a big picture into a narrower focus?
So that's actually, one of the interesting things as a lot of model builders are trying to go away from like the top coding language of Python, JavaScript, there's lots of public data out there.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about like enterprise applications built in Java, C++, and more low-level languages. They're really looking for, I have two or three giant code bases. How do I get other examples of this? And that's a phenomenal opportunity to actually use synthetic data to kind of try to create different versions of that code in order to create more instances to be able to. And then that's when you probably, you'd create the synthetic code base, and then maybe you would have human annotators actually annotate the data so that you could feed it back into model. And then you would have something that would have a better understanding of your unique code base that you'd like the models to be able to be used against.
Okay. All right. And I skipped this question, but does the use of the synthetic data happen more in specific vertical industries, or is there a part of a company that will use synthetic data more than others? Like, where are you seeing it being used?
I think we touched on this earlier, right? Like obviously on like self-driving, full self-driving, that's a big place where there's just not enough data. The other place is like healthcare data, where it's really the industries that are really, really, really concerned about safety, obviously like full self-driving, and obviously healthcare as well, or very highly regulated, where they really have to flush out all the bugs of being able to use AI in a system before they can ever use it in production. Because obviously you can't set a car on the road unless you are 99% sure it's not going to crash into another car, right?
Right. So in the healthcare space, is this where we see examples of where they're trying to use AI to maybe detect cancer tumors earlier, and so they don't have the data from all of the scans,
or maybe not that sophisticated yet, but something like care plans, so they can create lots of different lots of different scenarios for different diseases and different like symptoms that a patient may have, and then have a model fine-tuned on that data to produce different types of care plans.
Okay.
And so that's a good opportunity because they only have first of all, there's all sorts of laws around HIPAA and stuff. So be able to use the data, to be able to use real data to begin with, but they can create synthetic data that is realistic scenarios that can help train that model. Okay.
All right. I think I understand that. All right. Yeah. And so, the other fear that I hear, and this might be more on the synthetic content side of things, is that the use of the synthetic data will somehow produce results that are either inaccurate or not correct. We get into the whole copy of a copy of a copy thing when you're photocopying something, and it gets worse and worse. So that as you take the synthetic data and then maybe tweak it a little bit, but then you feed it back into the system, like that seems more problematic. But is that more on the synthetic content side of things versus,
I would say it's and what you're really kind of touching is like almost like reinforced hallucinations, and that like when you get from the copy to the copy to the copy, like it's imported bad data. Now that data is put into like the core data set, and then they've retrained on it, and now this hallucination that came from the original data set is now kind of core to the system. How do we account for that? That's where you go back to the human data. This is where you have to bring back in the human annotators, look at the data, create data sets, and be able to identify those anomalies that are not being caught at the entry point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is related. This is a little bit off related, or a little bit of a side quest here that we're going to talk about. But we, on the prep call, when I was talking to your colleague, Adam, we were talking about this article where we saw that linguists had recently discovered that AI was producing words like the word delve. And then they were using that word more and more in their outputs. And then they discovered that because of that, humans were then starting to use that word more because they saw the AI output. And so now I'm starting to wonder if synthetic data is used for a model and then it produces something that's not based on human generated content, are we going to start believing that data, and which might be based on synthetic to start with? Or is this just going to, do I start diving down into a matrix like rabbit hole here?
I mean, it's definitely an interesting question. I mean, as humans or as biological machines, we're made for adaptation, right? So as we see things in our environment that are, I mean, this is going into biology, but as we see things in our environment that come up over and over again, we're going to adjust to them and then think that that is part of the environment. So obviously, like, as these, people are using, for example, ChatGPT every single day to do emails, to do, even to respond on Slack, right?
Yeah.
As they do that, and as they get their responses, their response without OpenAI, without ChatGPT, are probably going to start modeling those, because we just habituate to those type of activities.
Because we start reading the outputs that we don't know if they're from ChatGPT or if it's written by a human, and we start using the words that it's kind of creating, and it's creating words like delve. And I'm not using it in my own language yet, but I just found that was an interesting word. I at first I thought it was realm, but it's delve that people are using now.
That's interesting.
Look it up. There's an NPR article around it. So if you might be interested in that part.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that. That's fascinating. And it's interesting because also just language evolves naturally.
Yeah.
Like the whom thing, and how many people in the world, in the United States at least, that uses whom correctly probably could be counted on one hand. The language just eventually moves on.
Right.
And so
from my standpoint, I was, I started out as a newspaper writer and was a traditional writer. And now look how many people are just using text, acronyms and all that kind of stuff. It feels like language is devolving that way. And then we're going back to hieroglyphics with emojis and icons and things like that.
Yeah. Well, how many people have you heard actually pronounce the word lol?
No, nobody does.
No, people do.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm hanging out with the wrong people. They actually say lol instead of LOL.
Well, I've heard them say it. Either LOL or lol, as opposed to laughing, which, you go back 25 years before there was text messages. Nobody was saying that. So, things, as they become into the environment, people adapt and it becomes commonplace.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to jump back to my regular scheduled questions. And I think you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about, the use of synthetic data. Is there a discussion amongst your colleagues about whether synthetic data that's used in a trading model should be identified? Because I know that in the ChatGPT world, and when you're generating an image, for example, it's probably a good practice to let people know that this image was generated by an AI. Is there a similar kind of disclosure discussion, or at this point it doesn't matter for the people?
No, there's definitely anybody that's using any sort of data at this point obviously wants to know its point of origin. And so if it's a piece of synthetic data, they want to know that it's a piece of synthetic data, because depending on their goals, like we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, synthetic data has specific use cases that it's really good at, about like improving models, getting them to comparable bar with the other models.
Yeah.
But when they want to do, and so if you were going to, if you're working with a model builder or somebody that's really doing anything that could require human or synthetic data, and they're not getting the results they're expecting, obviously that can track back to whether they're getting synthetic data or human data. And so obviously that transparency is incredibly important.
Yeah.
I mean, this goes back to just my history and my career in data. Is the most important thing about data is where does it come from and how transparent is the pipeline between its point of origin and the actual person or machine that's using it.
Yeah.
If there's a black box in between, that's when you see things fall apart.
Okay. I should start talking to you about explainability then, because that seems like a big, that's where the black box is. A lot of times you ask someone, and even a data scientist, you're like, why did it make that decision? And they all go like, well, I don't know.
Well, so that's actually, and man, it's incredibly fascinating around the whole concept of like chain of thought reasoning, right? And that's trying to get at the whole concept of the black box, right? Is like, this is the reason why it's about to give you the answer but why did it give you, why are those the reasons that it came up with to begin with? So it's like, it's no matter how far you go, these models are still, the explainability is incredibly hard. You can go back to the weights of the models. You can say, this is kind of why, but to really pin down what was the probabilistic reason of why one word came after another, we don't really have that ability to explain that right now.
Does it become like a chicken or the egg type of scenario or is it, did I just make another leap of weird logic? I probably just made that weird
Can you
leap.
say more to that? Like, what do you mean?
Well, again, there was something that you had said in that answer that made me think of, which came first type of a thing. But that's all right. Don't worry about that.
Oh, no. Yeah. I do get what you're saying is like, we don't know, like,
why I picked one word over the other.
No matter what previous thing you produce from the model to kind of give you a reasoning for why it's producing the answer it is, still has a probabilistic model behind it that created that answer, to which we don't have that information. So like somehow there would have to be a connection between the weights and the training of the model and specific outputs that would probably be close to machine code that 99.9% of people couldn't read anyway.
Okay. With the use of synthetic data and human data, are you seeing systems that can detect whether something is been produced with synthetic data? And I know that you were talking about like the identifying it, but then can it also be detected by other tools or systems as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, I mean, if we want children to be able to learn and practice things in the future, these are paramount, so they don't just cheat on everything, right? Like, we have to be able to, and so like obviously that is a huge component of evaluations and being able to not just understand the performance of the model, but be able to kind of predict the types of outputs it's actually going to be able to produce, and therefore be able to identify if this is something a machine produced or a human is actually producing. And obviously, like when we think about, we go into things like fraud detection and other capabilities in the enterprise, these are incredible investments the enterprise is making in order to be able to use these models. They have to be able to detect what is real from a human and what is from a computer.
Right. And the whole world of synthetic data, is this just limited to maybe the data scientists on the team, or is it really important that everybody in the enterprise, in the business, knows about it or understands it?
Oh no, I think this is
just that one corner of the building where they're all talking about it.
I don't think we're quite there, or at least I haven't seen it yet, but we are definitely on the path where just like you have training around like human engineering, protecting your passwords, all that stuff around cybersecurity, of making sure your whole organization understands the risks of phishing and stuff like that. We're going to have the same thing around synthetic data, because you're going to see an email from a CEO that looks completely real and legitimate. It's probably maybe even coming from their email address, and there's going to have to be tools in place that safeguard an organization around that.
Okay, but like, how is that going to apply to use of synthetic data, though? Because that's
that would be synthetic. That would be synthetic data, right?
Okay.
The malicious data created for people that are using these models for uses that unfortunately they're going to do, but we'd like them not to. So we'd have to be able to evaluate the fact that this is not actually coming from a human. This is synthetic.
And has there been a set of best practices that companies have set up yet around this, or are we still kind of in the wild
very
west?
Nascent.
Very early.
Still very much in the wild west in this space. Like we talked about a little bit, like in the place, in full self-driving and other regulated and risky industries, obviously, like they're starting to come up with frameworks around it, but the majority of enterprises today still are like at the early days. I don't know if it's so much the Wild West, because I think there's much more risk aversion than there is necessarily a willingness to just like build a tool and put it out there to the public.
Right. All right. So to use one final analogy, Alexius, was the Matrix actually the best case example of synthetic data, since it was a simulation of Earth in the 1990s?
Yeah, but remember that nobody knows what chicken tastes like anymore, so.
Right. Like if you're trying to explain synthetic data to someone, could you just say like, well, the world that was created by the machines in the Matrix is an example
I think
of that?
I think that'd be a great example of it.
There you go.
It's a virtual reality, so.
All right. Alexius, again, thanks again for chatting with us about this. Great topic. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Keith.
That's going to do it for this week's show. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts below if you're watching us on YouTube. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.